In the isolated expanse of Capones Island, there stands an ancient lighthouse. Built during the Spanish era, it has withstood the test of time and countless storms. But it's not just the weather that has left its mark on the lighthouse. Locals whisper of a curse that clings to its crumbling walls. Curse tied to the restless souls of sailors who perished in the treacherous waters surrounding the island. It was a cold, windy evening when Mang Berting, the island's caretaker, made his way to the lighthouse. His gnarled hands gripped the handle of a rusted lantern, the only source of light in the gathering darkness. Mang Berting had been tending to the lighthouse for decades, but even he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over him every time he approached it. As Mang Berting reached the lighthouse, the wind howled through the cracks in the walls, creating a haunting melody that seemed almost like whispers. He paused at the entrance, his breath visible in the cold night air. The door creaked ominously as he pushed it open, revealing the dark, musty interior. The smell of salt and decay was overpowering. Mang Berting stepped inside, floorboards creaking under his weight. He slowly made his way up the spiral staircase, the lantern casting eerie shadows on the walls. The stories he had heard over the years echoed in his mind, tales of ghostly figures seen wandering the halls, of disembodied voices calling out in the dead of night. He had never put much stock in them before. But now, alone in the darkness, he wasn't so sure. Reaching the top of the lighthouse, Mang Berting was greeted by the sound of the wind howling through the broken windows. He set the lantern down on a nearby table, its light flickering as the wind threatened to snuff it out. The room was cold and barren, with only the remnants of old furniture and equipment scattered about. But as he turned to check the lantern's fuel, he heard it. Faint, almost imperceptible whisper. Mang Berting froze, heart pounding in his chest. The whisper came again, more distinct this time. A voice, raspy and weak, calling out his name. Berting. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the walls and filling the room with an oppressive presence. He turned slowly, his eyes scanning the shadows, but there was no one there. Mang Berting's hands trembled as he reached for the lantern, ready to flee the cursed place. But before he could move, the temperature in the room dropped sharply, and the whispering grew louder, more insistent. Berting, tulungan mo kami. The voice was filled with despair, plea for help that sent chills down his spine. He wanted to leave, to run as fast as he could, but something held him in place. Suddenly, the wind died down, and the room was plunged into an eerie silence. Mang Berting's breath came in ragged gasps, his heart racing. The silence was worse than the whispers. It was as if the very air had been sucked out of the room. Then, without warning, the lantern's flames sputtered and went out, leaving him in complete darkness. Mang Berting fumbled in the dark, his hands searching for the lantern. His fingers brushed against something cold and clammy, something that wasn't there before. He recoiled in horror, his mind racing with fear. The voice came again, this time right beside his ear. Huwag mo kaming iwan. Tulungan mo kami. It was no longer just a whisper. It was a desperate plea, filled with anguish and pain. Mang Berting's mind was a whirl of panic and terror. He stumbled backward, knocking into the old table, sending the lantern crashing to the floor. The sound echoed through the room, breaking the oppressive silence. In the darkness, he'd feel them, cold, unseen hands reaching out, grasping at him, pulling him back toward the center of the room. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The hands let go, and the room was silent once more. Mang Berting collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, his body shaking with fear. He lay there for what felt like hours, too terrified to move, his mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. When he finally dared to open his eyes, the room was empty. Cold, oppressive presence was gone. With trembling hands, Mang Berting pushed himself up off the floor. His legs felt weak, barely able to support his weight as he staggered toward the staircase. He needed to get out, to escape the cursed lighthouse and never return. But as he reached the top of the stairs, he froze. The whispering had started again, faint at first but growing louder with each passing second. This time, the whispers were not calling his name, they were speaking to each other. In low, hurried tones. Mang Berting couldn't make out what they were saying, but the urgency in their voices sent chills down his spine. He took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. The staircase seemed longer now, stretching down into an abyss of darkness. Hindi ka makakatakas. The voice was clear, unmistakable, and it sent a wave of pure terror through Mang Berting. He turned and fled down the stairs, his footsteps echoing loudly in the enclosed space. The voices followed him, growing louder, more frantic, until they seemed to fill his entire mind. He could hear them all around him, pressing in on him, suffocating him with their desperation. When he finally burst out of the lighthouse and into the cold night air, collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. The voices were gone, replaced by the sound of the wind and the crashing waves. But the fear remained, lodged deep in his chest, like a knife. He knew he could never return to the lighthouse. No one could. The next morning, a group of fishermen found Mang Berting wandering along the shoreline, his eyes wide and vacant. He spoke of the voices, of the cold hands that had tried to drag him back into the darkness. But no one believed him. They said he was just an old man, driven mad by the isolation of the island. But Mang Berting knew the truth. The lighthouse was cursed, and it would remain so until the spirit of the sailors who perished there found peace. Years passed, and the lighthouse was left to decay, its walls crumbling, and its light extinguished. But the locals never forgot Mang Berting's story. They spoke of the cursed lighthouse in hushed tones, warning travelers to stay away from the island after dark. And on stormy nights, when the wind howled and the sea raged, they would hear the voices, the cries of the lost souls still trapped within the lighthouse, calling out for help that would never come. But some nights, when the moon was full and the sea was calm, faint light could be seen flickering in the distance, coming from the old lighthouse. And those who saw it would swear they heard the sound of whispers carried on the wind, calling out to them, just as they had to Mang Berting all those years ago.